Good afternoon, I should say. We're just about in the afternoon now, so thank you all for coming to join my session. I'm Chloe Dellow, one of the strategic risk specialists at OneTrust. So for myself, my role specifically focuses on helping organisations mature their third-party risk management programs, as well as risk and compliance programs as well within the business. So one of the hot topics is always third-party supply chain in terms of how we're moving away from sort of point-in-time assessments and how we can mature our program. So today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about what I'm hearing across the field in terms of what I'm hearing across my customers and from prospects as well. And hopefully you can get some good insights in terms of some of the shifts that we're seeing in the space. So one of the key things to start with is the regulations and the expansion of sort of data operations that we're sort of seeing. And I think regulatory pressure is something that has always very much been apparent. But the new regulations that we see, and again, there's more we can add here, are becoming increasingly more challenging to adhere to. So, for example, we have the like of NIS2, which is very popular and is being implemented and rolled out across a number of different sectors and industries. And again, with the new revision of that, we actually saw so many more industries and businesses having to become compliant. And what we often don't think about is the overlap with these frameworks. So if we take NIS2, for example, the overlap with other regulations is actually quite significant. So for example, ISO 27001 is about 75% overlap with NIS2. Then we've got DORA about 73%. So it's about how we can save that time and make sure we're not duplicating efforts. And we're seeing those more mature organizations are trying to move away from that. We also see a lot of organisations in both financial services, but also beyond, being in scope for DORA compliance as well. So that's where we've had a lot of conversations around third-party risk from more of a regulatory standpoint over the last few years. And one thing I like to share that often can be surprising is it's not always financial institutions, banks and insurance firms that are purely interested in DORA. A lot of organisations are trying to align to the frameworks, even if they're not mandated by the regulators as well. So I'm seeing more and more organisations trying to streamline their frameworks to some of these regulations. And even over the last few weeks, we've had the new cyber resilience bill as well, which we've seen more and more organisations look at. And one of the things that we think about is the more technology we look at, the more AI systems, the more capabilities that we're kind of leveraging from different providers. This puts our organisation at risk. And the complexity of technology and the systems that we're using only pose more risks. So third-party risk is actually only kind of a small part of our risk landscape, and more mature organisations we see are actually trying to embed the third-party risk programs that they actually have with their wider risk ecosystem by thinking about how we can embed third-party risk management into our wider operations. So thinking about risk and embedding that into procurement and into privacy and cyber-based processes as well. And what we can actually see is that so many organisations are actually prioritising growth and innovation over managing risks. But sometimes what we think about is how risk and managing risk can actually help inform your businesses and actually help you, inform your business decisions as well. So we're seeing those more mature organisations are actually using it as a business enablement when it comes to risk management. They're not seeing it as a problem. They're often seeing it as an opportunity here. And again, we expect this to kind of become more critical. So third-party risk management really is quite critical for organisational growth. We do significantly rely on our third parties and our supply chain, but not just our supply chain as well. But this is becoming a growing network, and you can see the stat on the board here. About 79% of organisations are expecting their use of third parties to kind of grow. And sometimes it's not just the third parties we're working with directly, it's about who they're sort of subletting, subcontracting with, and maybe our fourth and nth parties as well. And we're seeing this becoming an increasing challenge across organisations as well. So what you can see here is we can have so many different teams, and what we need to leverage is, we need to leverage third parties and work with them if they want growth and to innovate. And with that, of course, becomes increased risk within the business as well. But we really want to see it as innovation. And one thing you can actually see here, for example, is how our organisation is only going to have increasing risk as we kind of expand our network of third parties here. And what we're seeing is sort of legacy approaches when you look at third parties by assessment at a point in time is really no longer good enough. We speak to organisations that still have very much manual processes where it takes, months almost to onboard a supplier. It can be through multiple different systems. It can be very time-consuming and manual. And often the fact that it's a point in time also leads to challenges around things like cyber breaches and challenges that you might pose on the organisation by not doing things in real time. A point-time assessment is very much at that given point. It doesn't give us continuous visibility. So with more mature organisations, we're seeing an increasing level of organisations trying to look at how they can have more continuous visibility of their supply chain and how we can continuously put some automation in place to do this as well. And finally, siloed insights as well. We hear from board members all the time that they're struggling with reporting, being able to kind of get that holistic view across different departments. And again, third party is only a small part of the wider risk landscape. So it's really important that we're kind of having that uniformed and holistic view of risk within the business as well. And again, when we are doing it in silos, it can be costly. Multiple systems that you're paying for, time costs, the number of employees. And when you are disparate and you're doing things in silos, often that is when risk does become missed. So with OneTrust, how we kind of support customers is by looking at that end-to-end risk management program. And a lot of organizations sort of come to us and say that we're really good at onboarding vendors. We're really good at thinking about how we can go through procurement systems. We can work with our cyber teams. When we have a new project coming in, we're really good at that. But we then, assess them and maybe don't reassess them very often, or if we do, it might be a manual assessment. So we're hearing more and more organizations leveraging data feeds. So there's a number of ones we work with out the box. Within OneTrust, we have good partnerships with the likes of Risk Recon and Security Scorecard, but other good providers are out there as well to help with things like continuous monitoring of our supply chain as well. So for example, having data feeds that could identify a data breach, for example. We also have the ability to look at things like screening of our vendors. Are they going to be politically exposed people within that business? Is there going to be a modern slavery issue? So understanding our compliance and doing our due diligence on vendors when we're onboarding them is really critical. And we're seeing organizations really trying to streamline that and bring in more due diligence in place. And then when it comes to the monitoring and management, where can we provide AI? Where can we bring in automation as well to kind of help streamline that process? Can we digest documents like SOC 2 and ISO 27001 to kind of provide suggested answers for third parties? How can we make it easier for them to respond to your questionnaires? Because we do know that can be a challenge for suppliers. But also when it comes to the offboarding, I think I heard something really interesting recently. It was like, when did you last offboard a supplier because they were too risky? And I think that's something I've got a slide on in a second. But sometimes we forget about that termination piece and removing the data that we have stored on that vendor and thinking about it from a more of a continuous life cycle and not just thinking about vendor management as part of onboarding is really critical. And we spoke about having an integrated engagement there as well. We're seeing more organizations not think of a third party in silo, but thinking about all the services and products they provide. So let's take the likes of AWS or Microsoft, those sort of businesses like Amazon, really big players, in the field. You might have multiple different services and products that they provide to you as an organization. You can't be looking at that at a vendor level. So we're seeing those more mature organizations simply look at those inbound requests, but think about, okay, has this service been used somewhere else in the business by a different country or department? But also, how can we actually assess risk for that particular given engagement? That is going to give you much better visibility of your supply chain as well. And what we can also see is the ability to kind of have that contextualized insights when you're working across different teams and functions as well. So your privacy team might be sending the same assessment, maybe sending one assessment to a particular supplier, and so is your cyber team. So sometimes having organizations that streamline that together, either in the same system or by communicating together, is really what's going to help drive that uniform view of risk and help reduce the silos and the challenges that you have when it comes to understanding the risk posture of a particular supplier. Because it might not just be you within the business working with them. So we spoke about having that risk-informed sourcing as well. So talking about how we can do our relevant due diligence on our suppliers as well, making sure that we understand if they are compliant, if they are safe to work with as well. And again, it's sometimes about thinking about, okay, if something goes wrong or if there's a disruption, what other vendors might kind of come in and support us? Or if there's a critical service or system that goes down, what is our plan of action if that goes wrong? And especially with these regulations, I think, especially with this too, we're seeing more and more organizations, because of those regulations and the pressure and some of the things we've been seeing in the news, a lot more organizations are actually sort of doing, as part of sourcing, also looking at being able to kind of do scenario testing. So if there's a particular vendor we can no longer work with, is there another one that can come in and we can work with quickly? Or is there a backup? Is there a manual way in case disruption fails? And people are being much more proactive about thinking about the what-ifs and thinking more about incident response as part of their wider third-party risk management, as part of that initial sourcing as well, and thinking about exit strategies too. And then also doing that risk-based contracting as well. So making sure that within your contract, you understand exactly what services they're going to provide, the data they're going to have stored, and when that particular contract comes up as well, making sure that you've got provide measures in place so that you know what's going to happen at the end of that contract renewal as well. So my question a minute ago was, when was the last time you offboarded a vendor because they were deemed too risky? And I think this is really interesting because it does happen. We've had a number of customers, we've had a number of people I've heard where they say, actually, sometimes you just can't risk working with a third-party supplier. But what could be more risky is when you actually don't know what suppliers you are working with. So what I mean by that is a really good example is Salesforce, for example. In there, they have embedded Gainsight, for example, and there's other systems that do very similar things. That might not be on a vendor you've personally onboarded, but they have kind of embedded capabilities with another provider. So that can be really difficult sometimes to kind of have visibility of. And we're seeing more organizations try and understand not only those suppliers, but also their fourth parties and nth parties as well. And then again, what do we think about AI? And this is a conversation you can't ignore. This is something that we're hearing more and more with organizations as well. So when it comes to AI, we're seeing TPRM teams becoming very heavily invested in not only how they govern the use of AI within their business, but it's also something important to think about how your suppliers are using AI within their business as well. Because this, again, could be very critical. And we're seeing, there's been an increase in AI incidences, as you can see here, over the last sort of few years. And again, there's probably more so now. And this is something that we're sort of identifying, critical AI risks is something that we're looking at from an enterprise risk view. But there's kind of two sides to this, because people see there's a risk of using AI. But one thing that we should really kind of think about is these risks that AI poses are not necessarily new risks. They're often risks that we already had in the business, but can become a greater concern. So often these AI risks are linked to particular cyber concerns or IT concerns within the business as well. So it's something that I think has intensified and also kind of put a lens on when it comes to risk management as well. And I think this is why we're seeing a lot more board conversations with risk, with the introduction of AI, and the more that it gets rolled out, I think people are having more of a lens of what this means as well for the business. And I really like this because it kind of talks about kind of the areas of AI risks. And one of the two kind of big kind of key things when we look at kind of which of the following AI risks organizations are kind of facing or underestimating, two of the kind of key ones were cybersecurity vulnerabilities, but also third-party use of AI. So this is really interesting, the kind of type of AI risk that we have. And again, AI agents is something that comes up a lot. We see a lot of organizations building their own vendors. I know that Copilot makes it very, agents. AI makes it very easy to kind of build your own agents. I know Copilot, a lot of organizations are saying to me that they have people in their teams that aren't AI experts kind of building their own Copilot agents. So it is a risk, but at the same time, people have also been saying to me, well, but how about if we don't use AI? That is also where we're going to be a bit behind, It helps innovate. And what we have actually seen, some of the studies we've done and some of our, some large organizations have done is found that early adopters of AI have actually seen a significant increase in revenue. So we've got a 1.5 revenue growth versus competitors when they are actually leveraging AI. So there's the risk of using it and making sure we have the appropriate measures in place, but there is evidence to show that people that are not leveraging it may potentially be left behind as well. And again, as we go through digital transformations as businesses, we're seeing a lot of customers say, okay, what can we do for Gen AI? And a lot of the time, organizations are very kind of strategic in how they bring it out, and they want to make sure they're doing it at a pace that's right for their business. But we need to consider how we do leverage AI, because we could become sort of left behind if we don't think about how we use it as well. So there's two sides to the view when it comes to AI. And what have we seen within the field at OneTrust? And like I say, I'm seeing more organizations leveraging AI to innovate, but also to save time. So when it comes to very manual processes, thinking about how we're able to kind of reduce some of those manual processes, like, for example, responding to questionnaires. Can we scan documents like SOC 2 or ISO 27001 reports to provide suggested answers? Can we use an AI agent to help us onboard a vendor, for example? And the answer is yes, we are moving towards that, and that's something a lot of our customers are starting to kind of adopt some of our early programs. When we speak about what we've already helped customers do and what we've already heard in the field, we've kind of seen a significant reduction in time and cost taken to kind of help onboard vendors. One of the key things I think is really interesting is the amount of data that we can get from doing things like screening and monitoring. And there's a number of organizations I've seen, particularly in sort of healthcare, I would say, pharma, and also in the financial services sector, where organizations are saying we need to really improve our screening and monitoring. And what really surprises me is how many organizations have these screening tools but separate. They're disparate. They're not embedded with their wider third-party risk management program. And I get why, because everything did used to be in silos. You'd have different teams, like compliance, that might be responsible for modern slavery. Your financial crime team might sit in a different field or department from you. But we're seeing that organizations are now moving towards a more of a data-enabled based third-party risk management approach, and teams are collaborating together now. And I like this final one about risk-led decision-making. I think one thing I've really noticed is people are moving away from like a compliance tick box exercise or a procurement process when it comes to third-party risk management. But we're using, when we take a step back and think about risk, we're kind of helping it make, using risk to kind of help make business-informed decisions as well, and helping us identify, where risks, if they materialize, could really help impact us from an operational resiliency perspective. And that's how you get the board's attention. That's how they care ultimately, is when they understand how your third parties ultimately could be significant and detrimental for how you operate as a business and ultimately impact your day-to-day operations. So that was a bit about kind of how we support. And I think one thing that we're often seeing is how we can make that enterprise risk-wide awareness for your organization. So thinking about the estimated loss of a risk, should that actually materialize, it's not just a financial loss sometimes that we see when we kind of have impacts with third-party suppliers. But sometimes third parties can actually cause a significant reputational damage. And actually that is something that often is overlooked when we focus so much on kind of the monetary kind of side of things. But reputational risk, cyber risk, IT, there's so many other different types of risks, or privacy-based risks, that can also be significantly detrimental to the business. And it's about quantifying impact as well, so being able to aggregate that visibility at the top level of the business, but also have your different views as well. So thinking about how particular departments or different types of risks are posed by different third-party suppliers as well, and making sure that you have those connected insights across the domains as well. So you're, again, not working in silo. And finally, thinking about how we can mitigate risks as well, and the visibility that can be driven by growth as well. So making sure that we're measuring performance of those suppliers. A lot of the time I speak to customers about kind of embedding SLAs into contracts as well, and kind of holding their vendors accountable in terms of the service they provide as well. And I think, again, the operational resiliency-based regulations do really kind of push that side of things as well. And finally, just like to kind of touch on this particular diagram as well. And I think what we're seeing organizations do is kind of bring kind of risks together into one and kind of have that holistic view. And I think ultimately what's really important is the business objectives. I like to sort of like the comment that you can't really have risk without the business objective piece, and I think that's really important, because ultimately the reason we're managing risk is to kind of help us with our business strategy and objectives, and often we kind of forget that as part of the wider risk management. If we're sitting in information security and we're not thinking about why we're doing risk management, it can really cause issues. And I think it's really about having a very risk-aware organization and business at that board level and from top and from bottom up as well is very important. And then thinking about how your enterprise risk management and compliance and policy programs all tie up as part of that. And what you can see here is when you've got all of your organizational entities and projects and work that you're doing to kind of help achieve those business operations, third parties are kind of just one of those small kind of components of contextualization when it comes to your wider business programs. And I think one of the kind of key things we see when it comes to risk management is we have different types of risks as well. So it's like we said earlier, it's not just reputational, financial. We've also got operational-based risk, geopolitical risk, ethical risks, ESG and performance. And AI risk was something we weren't talking about before. And in a few years, it might be something that we're not talking about as much again, because again, there'll always be new risks that are posing as well, that are continuously updating as well. But what's the most important is that how we're managing those risks as well. And we're seeing a lot of organizations move into making sure they're doing this in real time, like I mentioned, leveraging external data providers, threat detection tools, being able to make sure that we are not just looking at risk for third parties as part of onboarding, but also considering is that if there's a particular control failure or incident, having that response plan in place as well. So like I say, incident management is becoming more of a factor when it comes into this. And then finally, that control implementation. I think when you're thinking about controls you can put in place to kind of manage the risk posture of a supplier, it's about kind of feeding that back and not just looking at control management or implementation in silos, but also being able to think about how this how it can impact your wider business. So one thing that's really critical is not only understanding your compliance, but your third party's compliance to the regulations as well. And there's this saying I kind of come across quite a lot, is you're only as compliant as your riskiest third party. And I do like that quite a lot, because ultimately what we need to make sure is we're not understanding just our compliance posture as a business and how we adhere to these different regulations and frameworks, but how your suppliers and the people you're working with also comply to those different frameworks and regulations. So that control implementation is really vital, and the amount of times I sort of hear third-party risk being that point-in-time assessment and people not managing the risks that are identified or not putting the appropriate measures in place is more common than you think. And I think organisations are now thinking about how can we real-time look at these controls in place and identify when there's been a control gap, not just when it hits that annual due diligence cycle for that particular supplier. And assurance is really key as well. So the reliability of the data, the credibility of the data that is being provided by third-party suppliers. We're finding the verification of that data is becoming increasingly important, and making sure that we're using data from credible sources to kind of help back up what suppliers are saying. And then having effective incident and issue management at the bottom there as well. So this is kind of where we move towards when we're seeing more mature organisations. But I think one of the biggest things we see as organisations kind of mature their programmes for third-party risk management is the ability to be able to be more proactive rather than reactive. So not just reacting to when you've got a supplier that's kind of caused an issue for your business, but making sure you have preventative measures in place for that perhaps not to happen, or maybe the impact to the business not to be as severe as well. So I think just to kind of summarise, I think the kind of key thing to highlight is the landscape of third parties is only ever complexifying, whether that be because of AI, the increased reliability that we have on suppliers as we kind of grow our business and we kind of increasingly have reliabilities, but also things like mergers and acquisitions and anything that kind of allows us to grow as a business is only going to complexify your kind of third party risk posture within the business. And the way we need to kind of manage this, again, really is kind of recommended is kind of, again, having that kind of proactive approach, but also collaborating with your teams and not just thinking of third party as part of that initial onboarding and point-in-time assessment. So really moving away from that as well. So I think with that, I would just say thank you. And if anyone wants to kind of have further discussions in terms of what they're doing, any challenges they're having, we'd be more than happy to discuss that with you as well. Thank you.